There's so much to talk about here. Why don't we get some analysis from political analyst Dan Casino? Dan, thanks so much for joining us. Obviously, there's a lot of history being made here.
Absolutely. The last time we had a president or former president up on criminal charges was Ulysses S. Grant for a couple of speeding tickets in Washington, D.C. So this is entirely unprecedented. And the question here really is, number one, how is this going to play in with all of the other charges that former President Trump is facing? He's facing federal grand jury, he's facing charges in Georgia. So this is just the first. There could be a lot more coming for the former president. In addition, we have to look at what the political implications of this are. Former President Trump certainly seems to believe that these charges are ultimately good for him politically. He believes that this will help him get more attention, and this will force all the other contenders in 2024, people running against him potentially for the nomination for the Republican Party for president in 2024, to talk about him, to put him at the center of attention. And being the center of attention has always been former President Trump's superpower.
You know, one thing that has been discussed a lot with this case has been that this might be one of the hardest of the cases against the president to prove. So why don't we just talk about this case for a second here. 2006, Stormy Daniels says, the president denies it, he says that she had an affair with, at the time, citizen Donald Trump. 10 years later, 2016, he's running for president, and Michael Cohen, his fixer, writes a check to Stormy Daniels. We saw that we were showing the check on the screen for $130,000. Now, writing a check for somebody that to somebody that you may have had an affair with, that's not illegal. But if you write the check, and you say, oh, it's a legal expense, which is how they reimburse Cohen, then that is a misdemeanor. But if that reimbursement is actually tied to a campaign, now it's campaign finance, now it's a felony. So you understand that intent in this case then suddenly becomes the case, and that's kind of trickier to prove than to say A plus B equals C. You have to actually lead a jury to that conclusion.
Moreover, there's actually an issue with the legal standing here. So the question is, as you noted correctly, there has to be an underlying felony. That is, the campaign finance violation has to be part of an underlying felony. Well, if the underlying felony is a federal crime rather than a New York State crime, it's not clear if that counts as an underlying felony. So we're going to have to look at the indictment when it comes down to see exactly what the theory is here. Regardless of what it is, this is going to be a novel theory, and that's going to feed fires for people saying the former president is being indicted unfairly, being prosecuted unfairly, because they're saying no one's ever been prosecuted for this particular thing before as a felony. It looks like Alvin Bragg is just making stuff up. Bragg, of course, is going to say, look, I'm following the law where it leads. This is why we have grand juries. So it's not just Alvin Bragg saying the former president should be indicted, should be prosecuted. It is the grand jury. It is citizens saying it should be. And that does give him a bit of cover here.
And Dan, Mr. Trump has really stepped up his rhetoric in the last few weeks. He's called for protests if he were to be arrested. He's also been warning about death and destruction, could ensure if he is indicted. Now, he posted a photo of himself holding a baseball bat next to the picture of D.A. Bragg. Could any of these be put him in further legal jeopardy?
So the standard here for, we were talking about a crime potentially of incitement. That is, if I tell people to do an illegal act and there is a high probability they will do it because I've told them to do it, that is incitement. That is not protected by the First Amendment. This is like shouting fire in a crowded theater. I don't think anything he's done so far at rise level incitement. He's not making specific claims. But yes, if he went and said someone needs to go and hurt Alvin Bragg, or we need to have rioting and looting in the streets of New York City, and it happened, yes, he could be charged with incitement over that, certainly.
Okay, I want to talk, we should talk about sort of what happens next in this process, because Trump's attorneys have been on TV. I believe one was on CNBC a couple weeks ago talking about what happens if he gets indicted. Do you fight the indictment, or do you just go along with it and follow all the standard procedures? And they have said, at least weeks ago, their position was, we are going to follow all the procedures, all the standard procedures. I guess a mugshot, fingerprint, they're going to show up. They're going to, obviously, there's going to be some negotiation there because there's Secret Service that's involved in all this as well. The president, former president, under protection. Even as he goes through this process, he's under protection. So there's a lot of gears moving together here.
Yeah, this is actually something that people are always asking about when I've done interviews about this in the recent weeks. Say, wait, is he going to have Secret Service while he's in jail? And the answer is, yeah, of course. They, by law, have to protect him no matter where he is. He could even run for president in jail. He's not going to be in jail, though, immediately. What's going to happen is that Alvin Bragg and the DA's office is going to reach out to former President Trump's lawyers. They're going to try and arrange a surrender. If there is not a surrender, and President Trump's lawyers have indicated that he would surrender, then they would have to reach out to the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, President Trump's political rival, asking him to extradite former President Trump up to New York. That is not something DeSantis can really decide not to do. It's something he would have to do. He'd then be brought up and booked exactly like anyone else. There's going to be some negotiation, as you said. Would the former president have to be forced to wear handcuffs? But he certainly would have to go into the basement of the courthouse, get his mugshot taken, get fingerprints taken, and then appear before a judge. He almost certainly would not be held. This is a nonviolent felony, so he wouldn't be held to be released on his own recognizance. And then we'd have a trial date. And this is New York. We all know those trial dates can be weeks and probably months and months in the future. So we're going to be talking about this for quite some time.
And Dan, so much of the grand jury proceedings, it is rooted in secrecy. How much will we ever know about the inner workings, and how soon can we find out about exactly what led them to this decision?
So that is actually up to the jurors. After the grand jury is dismissed, those individual jurors have some leeway in what they can and cannot say. So we actually could hear from those individual people on the grand jury if they wanted to. It's not clear how much they'll be instructed that they're allowed to tell us. We are still going to get the official version, though. And grand jurors do not exercise a lot of independent judgment. It's the old phrase is that a prosecutor can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. So the prosecutor is going to tell us exactly what the theory of the crime was that the grand jury mostly went along with. So we're going to have a lot of information once we get the actual counts of the indictment and once we get the charging papers and the theory of the crime as enunciated by the prosecutor. So we're going to get a lot more information. I don't think we're ever going to find out everything that's going on within those individual grand jurors. They're protected for a reason, right? We don't want them to face political reprisals.
Okay, we're talking about the law now, but let's talk about politics, because, let's be honest, politics this will be viewed through the lens of politics, regardless of where people are on the spectrum. What does this do to the Trump campaign? Because there's been a number of theories that, one theory is, hey, look, it clears the field, because, his supporters, other Republicans will actually feel like he is being targeted and therefore will rush to him, build his numbers up, or some feel like maybe this could hurt his campaign. What do you think?
So what we've seen is in recent days that other Republicans have been saying this is unfair. We've seen this from the Speaker of the House claiming this is an unfair prosecution and threatening to investigate Alvin Bragg. So what's going to happen is we're going to be talking about Donald Trump, and that is what Donald Trump wants. Remember, a lot of his appeal, a lot of his argument is that he is a victim. He was a victim in the 2020 election. All these nefarious forces are out to get him. And now he's got evidence that these nefarious forces are out to get him. These Democrats are out to get him. And his political claim is that they're out to get me, but don't worry, this is really all about you. They're trying to prosecute you. They're coming after you. It's just they're getting to me first. So this is a good political argument for President Trump, former President Trump. But what's most important is that we are talking about him. The other people running for the Republican nomination in 2024, they do not want to talk about Donald Trump. They want to go on the air and talk about their own policy positions, what they want to do. But instead, we are going to be talking about Donald Trump. And as long as they're doing that, there's no air left in the room for anyone else to potentially move up in the numbers and get that nomination.
And Dan, the former president is also looking at many other cases, multiple other cases. How much legal jeopardy is he looking at in those other cases as compared to this one out of the Manhattan DA's office?
I got to say, of all the cases that we're looking at, this is actually, I think, probably the least serious of them. The case involving secret documents that he refused to turn over, that potentially carries a pretty significant penalty. And probably the biggest threat he's under is in Georgia, where he's under investigation for election tampering. And we have a grand jury down there that looks like it might be indicting him on those charges. And that is potentially a very, very serious issue, perhaps much more so than what we're seeing here. So this is, I think, at this point, kind of the least of the legal problems. It's just the one that happened to break first.
Yeah,
okay.
And it's breaking right here as we're on the air and right here out of New York City. Dan, thank you so much for your insights on this. I know we're going to be calling on you a lot over these next few weeks, so thank you so much for that.